So I trained as a nurse. I specialised in accident and emergency. Much later on I did a master's in medical anthropology. However, I'm a bit surprised that I'm thought of this wonderful person who goes around and does these talks. And I'm here lecturing to you today because when I was at school, much younger, I was bottom of the class. But eventually I joined something called the International Committee of the Red Cross. I have dual Swiss-British nationality. Now the ICRC is a bit like the Special Forces of the Red Cross. They specialise in war zones, they go anywhere, do anything, but they're not allowed to speak about it afterwards. They are the guardian of the Geneva Conventions and international humanitarian law, and they help to improve basic living conditions, save lives, and they do this by acting as a silent witness. Now, I've been in over a dozen war zones, including Lebanon, Ethiopia, Uganda, Sierra Leone, Afghanistan, Liberia, Sudan, Nigeria, and many others. And what my experiences show me is that war is wrong. There's no winners in war, ever. So, I'm known as the nurse who inspired Bob Geldof to start Live Aid. Who doesn't know who Bob Geldof is? You laugh, but it's true. What about Live Aid? Anyone else not? Because I'll explain it if you don't. Okay, you understand. Right. So, it was the biggest concert in the world, charity concert in the world, back in 1984. Now, in 1984, I was in a rural area of Ethiopia, and I was setting up a feeding centre where there was thousands of children that needed feeding. At the time, I had 300 children, but thousands more needed to come in, as well as adults, but the feeding centre was only for children under the age of 5, and they were all starving hungry. We had insufficient food to feed everybody, and one day I can remember outside the feeding centre, I remember counting 10 rows of children, and in each row there was 100 children, and I had 60 or 70 places to take in. They were all starving hungry, their skin was just dripping off their bones, they had no fat, they had no muscle, and the ones I chose were the ones that weren't that too bad. They were all starving, but the ones which I knew would be able to survive a bit, because the ones who are too bad, when you start feeding them, their body goes into shock and they die quickly. Now, of course, what made the difference in the end was the arrival of a BBC film crew. Until then, the world had no idea of the scale of what was happening in the famine in Ethiopia, but sometimes you think if they did, which I think they probably did, they probably just had turned their back. I remember the film crew arriving. Up until that time, there was no telephone, there was no internet, no mobile phones, let alone landlines. We didn't have television. I had a small battery radio, that's about it. And we had one aeroplane a week that arrived, a DC-3, that's a tailwind-wheeled plane, that came once a week with small supplies. If I wrote a letter, it would take several weeks to get to Europe. So it was very difficult to have communications with the outside world. And actually we had no other outsiders because we were in a main fighting war zone area. Outside of the village that I was in, people were not allowed to travel. So it was unusual that we had a private small jet that arrived, a plane that arrived, and this BBC crew arrived with the reporter Michael Buerk. And they arrived at the feeding centre. Now the feeding centre was maybe 2-3 times the size of this room, small, 300 screaming kids, all starving, but not necessarily starving hungry, because you get past the point of wanting to feed. So some wanted to feed, some didn't want to feed, some had diarrhea, some had vomiting, and the film crew coming along with their cameras outside and saying, oh, I just want to take some pictures. And I do remember one of the questions, the most poignant one, was, well, how does it feel like, Claire, having to choose who can come in to feed and who are the ones you reject, and knowing they're going to die? And I thought, well, how do you answer that? Well, it just breaks my heart. Now that film of me and other film clips of the whole famine in Ethiopia was out in the news within 2 or 3 days, and it was that shot, that clip of me talking and being interviewed that Bob Geldof saw, and he said, no person should ever have to go in a situation, particularly a young woman, and choose who can live and who would die. And that's what made him kickstart Live Aid. I do remember sitting in my hotel room that evening. Now the hotel, it had no running water, he had no electricity. We had buckets which I sort of sloshed over me, but it was just a bucket and that had to last me the day, also to flush the loo as well. For light at night I lit candles, and I remember hearing on my shortwave radio. Shortwave radio, for you who don't know, it sort of comes and goes. You can't hear it quite clearly. It was on batteries, and I could hear this song being sung. It was, Do They Know It's Christmas? Feed the World, Do They Know It's Christmas? And it was by a group called Band Aid. And they said it was this guy called Bob Geldof was going to make money, and he was going to send it to Ethiopia to help all these starving children. Now this was within a few weeks of the film crew coming. I had no idea of the reaction of the film crew at all at that time. And I thought, well, it needs more than the bloody Band-Aid here. And no, they don't know it's Christmas, because in Ethiopia we have a completely different calendar and it's not Christmas for them. So for me, it just made me furious. And I had no idea of the extraordinary reaction or my role that I played in it. Technology has made the world smaller. Technology has made us all neighbours, hasn't it? I mean, we can talk to people the other side of the world, we can see them, we can send messages, we can send films, but technology can't do the really important thing, is that give us back this village mentality that we used to have years and years ago, and that is to look after each other. Disaster relief will never change the world, and this is somebody who knows about disaster relief. I believe we can and must. We must transcend our differences. That is, rise above any differences we have. Find something we have got in common, which is culture or music or films or something, and make humanity our highest priority in life. We have to be the change we wish to see, so that others will follow. So, do you think you can make a difference? So if you think you may be too small to make a difference, then try sleeping in a room with a mosquito. Thank you very much for listening.